Have you ever heard the saying, the devil is in the details? What if I told you that that is absolutely not true at all? In fact, the devil isn't hiding in the details. He's hiding in distractions, in hopelessness, and in anything that keeps you from focusing on the right thing. In this episode of Soul Zero 2, we're going to talk about why that little phrase can lead you astray and where you should really keep your focus. And if you want to walk faithfully with Jesus, this is how to do it. Let's break it down on Soul Zero 2. Welcome to Soul Zero 2 today. This is the podcast that is putting the oxygen back into the Christian life one soul at a time. And our goal here is to explore timeless biblical truths and how they shape our everyday lives. Today we're going to challenge a common saying, the devil is in the details. You've probably said it yourself, maybe out of habit, when a project was overwhelming, or when you realized that maybe you overlooked something, or you were stressed out about missing that one last detail. But what if we've been buying into a lie every time we repeat this phrase, especially if you're a believer in Jesus? So what's the origins of the phrase? Historians say that the phrase probably evolved from God is in the details. That's where it really came from. That older phrase meant excellence that God cares about in every stitch of life, every brushstroke, every note. Because he is the God of order and beauty, he cares about the smallest things. Somewhere along the line, it became twisted. God is in the details became the devil is in the details. And like most half-truths, it stuck with us. And more dangerous than a bold-faced lie is a half-truth. So it's a little like how nicknames kind of start. You know, imagine maybe you had a grandfather who had a strong, noble name when he was young. But as time went on, the name changed in culture and it trickled down to your generation. And by the time it got to you, that name became a joke. That's what's happened with this phrase. Something noble got corrupted. And we find that this is what happens when we believe something that we garner from the culture over biblical truth. Why is the devil not in the details? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about why the devil isn't in the details. The devil doesn't live in the details. In fact, he can't. The details belong to God because God is sovereign. God is omniscient. God is almighty. The devil is not. In fact, every hair on your head is numbered. What about the Old Testament? Let me give you an example there. And I've read this probably 50 times through the years, and this stuck out to me this time around. In Jeremiah 27:21, God is telling Jeremiah what to say. And Jeremiah the prophet says this, and this is God speaking to Jeremiah via his, prophetically. He says, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels left in the house of the Lord, in the house of the king of Judah and in Jerusalem. They shall be carried to Babylon, and there they shall stay." And here's the part that really blew me away. "Until the day when I give attention to them, says the Lord. Then I will bring them up and restore them to this place." So God is warning Jeremiah, and here the Lord is speaking about the gold and silver vessels from the temple that were priceless. And God was telling them they're going to be taken out because I'm permitting them to be taken out by Nebuchadnezzar. And God acknowledges this. But God also promises that he himself will give attention to them. He's going to restore them, which is mind-blowing. No other religion has this. No other religion has the idea where God says, I'm going to do something, and then it happens exactly. And this happens hundreds of times in the Bible when you study prophecies and different things that happened. Now fast forward 70 years after the Jewish exile. They stayed in Babylon 70 years, right? That was another prophecy of detail that happened. We find that after 70 years, Nebuchadnezzar, it says it in Ezra 1, 7 and 8, King Cyrus, which was after Nebuchadnezzar, he himself brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord, and that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. Cyrus, king of Persia, had them released into the charge of Merodach, the treasurer, who counted them out to Shelbazzar, the prince of Judah. So what a mind-blowing detail. God waits 70 years to attend to his business. And that is absolutely amazing. And we find that when we focus on the idea of the cultural saying that the devil's in the details, we miss the very idea that God is the one who's in the details. Another scripture, Ezra 5:14 and Ezra 6:5 also make references to the vessel being restored. This is the explicit fulfillment that God attended to from the very beginning. God's hand of protection is on all the details of your life. In fact, God protects what's his. In Daniel 5, we find that King Belshazzar, he was one of the kings after Nebuchadnezzar, in pride and under the influence of alcohol and wine, right? He commanded that they bring out the vessels of gold and silver that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, so that him and his lords could drink and out of pride saying, hey, we conquered this and we took this, it's ours. Then, hence you have that famous saying, the writing on the wall. This is where it came from, where suddenly this hand begins writing on the wall their destruction. This act of desecration led to a prophetic prediction of God judging Babylon in destruction. And together, these passages trace the arc of God and his faithfulness in the details. His perfect attention to every minute thing that happens in people's lives. It's amazing how when you follow the arc of God's faithfulness, it's encouraging because he's in the details. So where does the devil actually show up? Well, it's not in the details. It's not in the small print, but in the generalizations, in the thinning of the message that God is in charge, and in the characterization of situations, saying, well, those details are going to kill you. He doesn't show up in the discipline of detail, but in the temptation to be distracted from details. Satan cannot control the details of our lives because he's not God. He's not omnipotent. Only God can. But what the enemy can do is tempt us to obsess over those details until we believe that God either doesn't notice or doesn't care. And that's the danger of being driven by details, where details kill you. Think about the story of Eve in the garden. The serpent didn't get her lost in the fine print. He got her distracted from the clear command that God gave. What was the command? You could have every tree but that one. The issue wasn't detail, it was disobedience, born of distraction. Satan distracted Eve and Adam, for that matter, and they both became distracted. They fell into sin. The real danger is distraction. Have you ever started praying and then suddenly remembered the 5 emails you forgot to send, or the groceries you need to buy, or that awkward conversation from yesterday that you need to deal with? That happens to me all the time. And that's distraction. Distraction is a form of spiritual warfare in this sense, but it's in disguise. It's subtle. That it's not this blatant attack feeling thing. It's a subtle undermining thing, kind of like in Song of Solomon, where it says, take up the little foxes because they spoil the vine, because little foxes undermine growth. And this is what these distractions are. And Satan doesn't need you to abandon your faith outright, just to live scattered, unfocused, to the point where you get way ahead of yourself in worry and fear. Satan wants you to miss the hand of God in the finer points of life and only see the devil in the details, not God. So there's a call to faithful attention here. The Bible calls us to the opposite of distraction, attention. So see God in the details, not the devil. Jesus said in Luke 12:6, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, yet not one of them is forgotten in God's sight? But even the hairs on your head are all counted. Do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows." And in Psalm 147:4, it says, "He determines the number of the stars. He gives to all of them their names." These passages show that God is deeply attentive to the most minute details in his creation, from the stars in the heavens to the hairs on your head. See God in the details, but also be faithful with the details God has placed in your hands every day. When you're faithful in those details, you're saying, God, I trust you with these small things, and you can trust me with the small things. In fact, Jesus said, if you're faithful in the small things, right, God will give you bigger things, right? Paul told Timothy, be sober-minded, endure hardship, do the work of the evangelist, fulfill your ministry in 2 Timothy 4:5. So this is not a glamorous thing. It's detail work. It's being faithful with the small things. Daily obedience in the redundant small things. Faithfulness in the small things shows God that you are trusting Him with the details of your life. It's kind of like a violinist that practices scales, and scales are boring, and scales don't win the competition, so to speak. The scales don't win it, nor do they bring you into the spotlight, but it's won in the quiet, unseen details of continual practice every day. That's where the battle is won. God honors that kind of faithfulness. So let's talk about redeeming this phrase of no longer saying the devil is in the details. So maybe we need to reclaim this old saying that the devil's in the details and instead say God is in the details, because that's the truth. The Spirit of God meets us in the small things, in showing up, in consistency, in faithfulness, in the most minute details of our lives. The devil doesn't live in the details. He lives in the noise, in the chaos, the temptation to skim past what really matters. So what's the takeaway today? Don't fear the details. Embrace them, because God's in charge. Don't buy into the myth that they're where the devil lurks and you'd better watch out and kind of live in fear. Instead, embrace them, because the details are where God's hand quietly works. So thanks for joining me today on Soul 02. If this podcast encouraged you, share it with a friend. And remember, real life with God happens not in the distractions, but in the details. See you next time. God bless you.